Everybody for joining us today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Penzias. He is a chair of the ASRM, American Society for Reproductive Medicine Practice Committee, and a member of the task force on COVID-19. He's also a member of the ASRM Board of Directors. He's very well respected. He is the surgical director at Boston IVF, a professor at Harvard Medical School, and the fellowship director of Boston IVF, Beth Israel Deaconess, and Harvard Medical School Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility program. So as you can tell from this very small snippet of his CV, he is very, very well experienced, very knowledgeable, and probably overqualified to give us some information about COVID-19 today. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Penzias to give us a little bit of an update. I know that we had a recent release just on November 12th from ASRM and would love to hear some of the new guidance that we have for patients.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Maas. And it's a pleasure to be here and chatting with you today, because I think that both of us in our practices hear from patients who are a little bit hesitant. If everybody were vaccinated against COVID-19, probably we wouldn't necessarily even be needing this webinar, but I think that there are a lot of questions that are out there. One of the things that I'm finding, and I wonder if it's similar for you in Utah, is are you getting questions about whether people who are not yet pregnant should get the vaccine if they're planning to get pregnant?
Absolutely, whether or not to be vaccinated, and honestly, when to be vaccinated. And for me, the answer is yes, and as soon as humanly possible for both of those. I'm sure that you're probably seeing that a lot as well in your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that both the yes answer, so that anybody who is planning to get pregnant, anybody who is pregnant, anybody who is breastfeeding should absolutely at any of those three time points get vaccinated. There's actually now a ton of safety data. There's over 400 million doses that have been administered in the United States of these vaccines. Over 3 billion of these vaccine doses have been delivered worldwide. So there's a lot of safety data. And in terms of timing, today is the best day if you haven't been vaccinated yet. Now, how about patients who are asking you for perhaps letters of exemption? You know, maybe they're planning to get pregnant. Have you faced the people asking you, because I'm not pregnant yet, or I'm going to be pregnant, or I'm just newly pregnant, can I get excused from the vaccine?
Absolutely, we're seeing that quite frequently, and in general, we're not recommending any waivers or vaccine exemptions for fertility concerns. So infertility and pregnancy are not criteria for waiving the vaccine or being exempt from the vaccine. Of course, there are other health-related concerns, but that exemption should be provided by the doctor or physician who is treating the chronic illness that would meet criteria for exemption. Other things that I wanted to note was that from my understanding, over 160,000 pregnant people have been vaccinated. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And the vaccinations have occurred in both the first, the second, and the third trimester, so that the safety data is out there. And these vaccines have the same safety record profile as the more commonly given vaccines that people get every year: the flu vaccine, chickenpox vaccine for children, rubella vaccine. So there's a lot of safety data that's accrued, both through direct observation of physicians, countless physicians across the United States and around the world, but also that the CDC is collecting lots and lots, so that we can be very assured when we're talking to our patients that the safety data is there in these 160,000 pregnant women who've gotten vaccinated.
But my understanding is we're still under vaccinated in our pregnant population, with only 31% of our patients. What do you think we can do to really increase that number? How can we best support this population?
Well, that's a great question, because as you say, only 31% of patients are vaccinated. And one of the other kind of really scary statistics is that pregnant women who become symptomatic with COVID have a 70% increased risk of death compared to their non-pregnant friends or family members who get COVID. So this Delta variant that's currently out there is really a scary thing, and that 31% is bad. But I can understand, when we're talking about vaccine hesitancy, which is really the crux of why I think so many people are not vaccinated who are pregnant, the question is, how do we approach them? What's the best way to overcome that? Some of that may be with some scientific information, which I'm happy to share, but also the personal approach. If somebody were to ask me, would you get this vaccine if you were pregnant? Would you encourage your sister, your daughter, your loved ones, your wife to get the vaccine? My answer is yes. And I like to speak to people, not just as a scientist and as a physician, but in a very personal way. If this were me, this is what I would tell you to do. This is the information, and this is the recommendation I have actually made to my family members, the people who I love most in this world. So if I'm giving that to those people, I want to share that good same advice with you. How about yourself? What's been your experience in those who are a little bit vaccine hesitant?
I agree. It's the data. The data is the most important thing to get patients to really understand the safety profile of the vaccine, the fact that it's recommended in any trimester for not only someone who is pregnant, who is trying to become pregnant, for their partner, and even those risks that you had mentioned, that increased risk of death with COVID, that spills over into the postpartum period as well. And so I talk about postpartum. I additionally talk about how if you are vaccinated when you're pregnant, that antibody, not the vaccine, but the antibody itself potentially could pass through the placenta and provide immunity for the baby or the fetus, which is an amazing opportunity, especially in this younger, vulnerable population, to reduce the risk of COVID infection in neonatals. And this is true for breastfeeding individuals as well. As a scientist, I love the data, I love the information. We recently had the study showing that the mRNA vaccines do not impact the implantation of euploid embryos, and that further bolsters the safety in pregnancy and the safety during fertility treatment. And then I also talk about the risks, which you had mentioned, that increased risk of death, but also the fact that COVID illness itself can impair sperm function, can also be associated with male erectile dysfunction. So there are other components that are impactful and have been documented and scientifically studied to be impactful for fertility and reproduction with infection compared to vaccination. And so when we talk about the infection versus vaccination risk, it tends to favor people moving more towards vaccination because of the safety profile and the risk with infection.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I emphasize those same points, that COVID, the disease, can cause fertility problems, specifically for men. It can harm their sperm counts. COVID infection can harm a man's ability to have and maintain an erection. So guys, if you're out there, you want to get that vaccine because you want to prevent the COVID disease from causing you to have a fertility problem, whereas COVID vaccination can prevent you from having a problem, COVID vaccination being very safe. But on that safety measure, one question that does come up a lot is, this Operation Warp Speed that led to the development seems to have come out of nowhere. So when people are saying, well, how do I know that mRNA vaccines are safe? What I tend to do is to go back to some of the older experience and give them a little bit of history. So we know that mRNA, the messenger RNA, was first discovered itself in the 1960s. And then research into how mRNA could be delivered into cells began in the 1970s. So then why is it that between the 70s and 2020, when this kind of hit the world stage, kind of what happened in the interval? Well, actually, back in the 1990s, there was some research about making a flu vaccine out of mRNA vaccine, and that was tested only in mice, and it was in the early stages. Really, it was not until 2013 when the first human mRNA viruses to treat rabies was first started to be developed. And because rabies is not a particularly common condition, it really didn't hit the newspapers. It wasn't quite as newsworthy. And there were some development issues with the delivery of the mRNA virus into the cells. But then really, when it first the first real clinical use was actually in 2018. So the same kind of fatty envelope delivery system that's currently being used to deliver these mRNA vaccines was used to treat Ebola. And so the World Health Organization has a product that's out there that was released and had a huge success. But because it was only being used limitedly in Africa, where the Ebola virus is resident, it didn't undergo that vaccine specifically from 2018 didn't undergo any commercialization in the US. And again, it didn't really hit the news and get publicity. So if people are saying, well, I need 2 years worth of 3 years worth of safety data that mRNA vaccines using this delivery system are safe, I say, well, let me tell you that the vaccine has been used very successfully, not only when it was clinically used starting in 2018 to treat Ebola, but the tests that led up to its release. This is only one new application. And I know that there are other new highly infectious respiratory diseases that are currently kind of being targeted for this great, very effective delivery system. So be on the lookout for other respiratory virus illnesses and flu in the future using this same very safe technology.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about the booster guidelines and recommendations and who is eligible, and should we be mixing and matching, or what you're telling your patients? Because my patients, thankfully, the ones that have been vaccinated are coming up due for their booster. So this is an emerging topic that we're discussing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And with the history of the boosters and the fact that there's the safety data with the vaccination is terrific. And the CDC does have some guidelines and recommendations, but what we're recommending is that when people who are trying to get pregnant, are pregnant, or are breastfeeding are actually coming up for their booster shot based on the CDC recommended timelines, we recommend go ahead and get your vaccination. Don't delay, don't try to time it. Don't wait, because as you said, if you're pregnant when you get the vaccine, that will provide some great antibody, not the vaccine itself. That does not go through, but the antibodies that your body makes, those very life-saving antibodies, will pass through the placenta and help protect those very vulnerable babies that are born. So as soon as you're eligible in an eligible group, go ahead and get your booster shot.
And my understanding of eligibility is 2 months after the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and then 6 months after either mRNA vaccine. And now the CDC is endorsing or allowing individuals to kind of mix and match their vaccine. Is that your understanding as well?
It is. That's exactly it. And so the people who've received the J&J vaccine, some of them can get a second J&J, or they can go ahead and get one of the mRNA vaccines, either the Pfizer or the Moderna. And all of them are safe, and all of them are good options. And it's really a dealer's choice, whatever's available locally, and make it convenient for yourself. Lots of pharmacies around the country are able to dispense the vaccine with appointments available online. So it's just a few clicks away to find out and make an appointment for your primary dose if you haven't gotten vaccinated, or your booster shot if you'd like to get one.
And very much reassuring regarding our miscarriage data or preterm delivery data or adverse obstetric data that we're seeing with these vaccines as well, supporting and showing that we're not seeing any adverse sequelae from them, and that people are continuing to have ongoing healthy pregnancies. I know there was an initial concern about the placenta with the vaccine. Has there been ongoing study or support of that?
Yes, there's been significant research because, first of all, the hypothesis that was presented by some folks who may have had some can't know what their motivation was, but in any event, the scientific basis was actually a flawed presentation, and that was debunked fairly quickly. But since that time of just the hypothetical debunking, there's been substantial data to prove that the COVID vaccine and the sequelae of taking the COVID vaccine do not do anything bad to the placenta. In fact, it's overall positive. So not to be a fear and not to be concerned about.
The long and short is get it yesterday.
Long and short is definitely get it yesterday, and I hope that that folks who are listening will be encouraged again to be able to have a good dialogue with your doctor. I think that one of the things that I know you and your colleagues at RCC and us at Boston IVF all believe is that, we are here to serve our patients. And if our patients are a little afraid to even tell us about their vaccination status, that's a barrier. We don't want you to be afraid. We want to be here to support you because we want to be able to make sure that you feel like you're being heard, that your fears are acknowledged because they're very important. We're not dismissing them, but we have a way of being able to present you with good data of safety, and that this is really going to be in your long-term best interest, because for us, a healthy mom, a healthy couple, a healthy baby is really what we're all after.
Absolutely. That open dialogue is incredibly important. We're seeing a lot of concerns and fears and unfortunately a lot of misinformation out there. And it's such an honor to be able to be a source of reliable information, to be able to discuss some of the primary literature and big studies showing support and safety of this. And again, I'm excited to have this discussion with my patients, to learn each individual's concern, and I know that you are as well, and to really find a personalized approach for comfort and treatment for infertility, as well as doing so safely during a global pandemic.